last but not least, before our panel discussion, we have next Conor Geraghty, currently, or maybe formerly, of Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council and soon to be head of active and sustainable travel in the NTA. And he'll be speaking about DLR and a reflection on what can be achieved in 5 years. Over to you, Conor.
Before he starts talking, I'd like to welcome Conor to the NTA. He's been great help even outside in the NTA in Dún Laoghaire, but it'll be great to see him come over to our side. So he'll be making all your lives a misery in the next while. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Joe. That's a good starting point for me, I suppose. And maybe to start off by saying this is not intended to be some sort of a backslapping exercise for Dún Laoghaire and the work we've done in 5 years, but more a reflection on, as my time in Dún Laoghaire comes to an end, what could be achieved in 5 years. And I suppose it's definitely the starting point is to thank, obviously, my own team and the people within DLR and the department and the NTA for all the support. And it was really, and the external consultants and all the groups that have been involved in projects in Dún Laoghaire. It's certainly everybody pulling in the same direction that has achieved quite a lot, I think. And I hope that comes across in the slides. So the starting point of where I got involved with active travel in Dún Laoghaire is sort of mid-2020 during COVID, when we started the COVID response. And the network that was in Dún Laoghaire at the time was reasonably well established, or maybe a good bit of groundwork had been done. Quite a lot of the radial routes had been progressed. Now, some of it wasn't of a particularly high quality, but there was maybe the bare bones of a network had been well underway. And people would be familiar with the work that was done during COVID or in response to COVID in the villages and along the coastal route. So that really sort of gave us a kickstart and really started the discussion about large-scale road space reallocation and very rapid change. That, in conjunction with the massive increase in funding from the NTA and the establishment of the active travel teams in early 21, really put the focus on trying to deliver these networks, walking and cycling networks, and to start thinking at a very much a program level where you were going to have to deliver project after project, which meant that we couldn't avoid talking about the whatabouts and traffic displacement and the ideas that it's bad for business and all the other stuff that gets leveled at schemes. So we had to sort of demonstrate as we were going that the projects we just finished were beneficial so that it supported the next scheme. And one of the key things that we did was we partnered with TU Dublin and Dr. Sarah Rock to undertake independent and robust research of all the schemes that we've done. So Sarah's done a huge amount of work over the last 5 years, and most recently the 4-year study in Blackrock that's only recently been published, which is probably the first of its kind, certainly in Ireland or maybe even in Europe, where there was a lot of research done about road space reallocation at a town level. So I would encourage people, that's a really important piece of research that's would be relevant for everybody across the country, not just in Blackrock. And I have, excuse me, a few of the slides here, which I won't do justice to for Sarah, but I'm sure people will get a sense of what's in the research. But it does dispel a number of the myths, and the one that constantly comes up is obviously reducing car access is bad for business, which is simply not the case, and it hasn't been shown to be the case anywhere. But it is really important to note that if you're reallocating road space, that it's done in a way that supports active and attractive public realms. You have to make the space that you're reallocating the right use and provide or promote the pedestrians and the outdoor seating and the planting to make sure that people want to come there. It's also really important to have it connected to the wider cycle network, so that you can give people the best opportunity to change modes, and not to forget about loading and deliveries for businesses, which is something they really stress about, and particularly where, if you look in the bottom right, informal deliveries would happen sort of ad hoc. When you reallocate road space, that's not, there's no opportunity for that anymore because it blocked the road. So providing loading facilities is really important. The other myth is that if you do reallocate road space, it only benefits the coffee shops or the sort of hospitality sectors, and that's certainly not the case in Blackrock either. It does obviously maybe give a reason for people to come in the first instance, but it's if you can get people on the street and encourage them to linger, the rising tide effect does lift all boats. And excuse me, that would be the feedback from the businesses themselves, that they would have thought it wouldn't have given the benefit that it had. Other success factors that were identified, I suppose, is the importance of an engaged business network, and the business group in Blackrock is incredibly progressive and looking to make really positive changes all the time. And it's important if you're looking to these type of schemes in villages and towns that you try to find those positive network and engage with them. And if you can't find those networks, then it would fall to the local authority to be the champions of the projects. But it's very difficult to deliver them in isolation with without somebody sort of to push them along. Within Blackrock and other areas in COVID, I suppose the step-by-step or the trialing was a real or was a way to try and get schemes progressed that might have otherwise fallen. And it does help you along in the journey, even if you knew that you needed to do further work, but you couldn't do it at that time. And Blackrock, again, is a good example of that, where on the photograph on the left, we wanted to provide a cycle track to replace that row of parking on the right. But it was a step too far at that time. I think that they weren't able, or the businesses couldn't see how that could be achieved. But when the Part 8 came around, that was like almost not discussed at all when it was included in the Part 8, because they understood at that stage the benefit of reallocating the road space, and that the lack of parking actually didn't really impact them that much. So the lesson learned, I suppose, in some of the bigger or more challenging projects is that the trialing does really help break a deadlock. So I mentioned already about working on the program, and this is just a slide we had from 2020, where when we were starting out on developing the program, we tried to come up with the strategically important or the strategically most significant schemes that still had to be delivered, and to get about getting them through planning, and there were all various different scales and sizes. And knowing that we were going to have to deal with Dún Laoghaire Town at some point, a trial pedestrianisation was done in 2021. So that gave us a real opportunity to gather data and, get footfall counters in place, and to start building relationships with the local communities, and to try, it was sort of a long-term view for Dún Laoghaire Town that it's not something that could be achieved really, really quickly. So a good starting point was the pedestrianisation. Quickly behind that then was the active school travel, which took a slightly different approach to network planning, where we tried to provide the greatest extent of infrastructure using the least amount of new infrastructure. So this scheme connected 65 schools in the county, but it was across 3 routes, which was 20 kilometres in total, but only required 2 kilometres of new infrastructure to deliver it. And that really highlighted the benefit of kind of micro interventions. And this is a good example of 2 blocks of quiet streets either side of a busy route. And by providing a pedestrian or token crossing and small sections of cycle lanes, you can actually connect these 2 smaller streets and provide a facility for people to get across a busy road that isn't a shared space and doesn't have people cycling on footpaths. So those kind of interventions, and this is another example, connecting a park, which is quite a busy route, or with a zebra crossing and a small section of 2-way. So the small interventions just formalize it and doesn't cause any tension locally, but there's real benefit to adding those type of facilities. So within active school travel, then there was a section along Dean's Grange Road, which is about 900 metres, and it was strategically important to the network overall, but particularly for these 3 routes. And I suppose I don't want to undermine it a bit, but it was certainly the scheme where Dún Laoghaire really, really hit the wall in terms of bike lash and people resisting and fighting back against schemes. It had a stint on prime time and Joe Duffy, and we had 2 Section 140 motions, and the engagement on it ran for probably 4 years before we were finally able to get a Part 8 approach. And not to overly linger on schemes that were challenging, but more to make the point that I suppose it was maybe a particular moment for the active travel team in Dún Laoghaire when we persevered to find a solution, and there was realization locally that we were going to keep going on this scheme until we did get it either adopted or a solution that was going to complete the network, because it wasn't a nice to have, it was a must have. And I think that really set the tone for the active travel team, and that we weren't going to shy away from difficult projects. Excuse me, we were going to keep going for the ones that were important. So I think that it was a hard fought battle for 900 metres, and it looks quite insignificant when you look at it on the map, but it was certainly a particularly important moment in time, I think, for us. And while we were fighting that fight, I suppose over the 4 years, we were still progressing the other parts of the programme that I had mentioned, and it was establishing that the network principle that you can't not do certain schemes, or sometimes what the kind of arguments that would be levelled at you is, well, don't do it on road A, use road B instead. But the network principle is that, well, you need A and B. You can't do one in isolation. They both have to happen. And so we can't just put a program on hold because one scheme gets bogged down. We have to keep going. So it's by constantly maybe bringing 3 or 4 new projects per year then, you know, you have this program. It's very hard to battle against all projects, particularly if they're, you know, close by, because members don't like to be seen to be voting against active travel schemes. So over the first 4 years of the program, I think we were reasonably successful, nearly 42 kilometres of new segregated facilities, but not focusing on the cycling too much. That included nearly 20 kilometres of footpath upgrades, 100 junction upgrades, new zebras and pedestrian crossings and bus stops. So it was very much the entire network benefited, not just the cycle facilities. As with most local authorities in 2023, the climate action plans were being released, and we have a decarbonising zone in Dún Laoghaire town. And transport is obviously a part of that. So we were looking to see how could we bring the town and complete the network on the east side of the county. So at that time, the routes in green are ones that were finished or installed, and the ones in orange were being progressed. So you can see very much within the cyan kind of hatched area that there was very little facilities in the town, and that would be similar to most towns, that as you get closer to the kind of dense urban centres, space becomes more hotly contested and usually narrower, quieter streets. So that scheme then became our Pathfinder project, and we were sort of coming up against a lot of pushback, you know, for cycling schemes in particular, and calling scheme an active travel scheme did bring a certain amount of negativity with it. So we were looking to come up with a brand or some sort of term that kind of did everything that we needed to do and followed all the policy without being focused on any one particular use or approach. So that's where the Living Streets brand came up, and it was based on 6 objectives that aligns very much with all of the national and local policies, but it's not focused on any one particular thing. So if your interest was improving the environment and more planting, there was something there for you. So that was a really useful title or brand to give the type of projects. And as we were looking at Dún Laoghaire, we knew we wanted to propose a pedestrianisation, but if we were to draw up a map and start engaging on that straight away, you'd probably get backlash from people that say, well, I don't want that outside my premises, or maybe don't put it there. So we started the pre-design engagement. We were socializing ideas all the way through that process. You can see this photograph is a pedestrianisation that shows all of the activity in the centre of the street, with the emergency access space to one side, but it's not located near any particular business. So we were getting people used to the idea that this is how the street would look. In the same way, the wider block where we were going to propose modal filters, the discussions very much started with, well, what is a modal filter and what does it do? And it stops rat running traffic, but we don't propose any particular location. So we were building up the idea over maybe a year. And by the time we got to the Part 8 and the Part 8 was published, there was nothing new in it. There was no surprises to people. So it didn't get that sort of very angry reaction. That being said, though, both sides of the debate, particularly for Living Streets Dún Laoghaire, they were very engaged. Those in support had a cycle through the street where they were trying to demonstrate that, you know, cyclists do spend money in the town. And the photo on the bottom right was those that weren't particularly in favour of the scheme, but it was ultimately adopted after a 9-hour council meeting, which I think went on till 2:30 in the morning or something like that. And we had about 7,500 submissions on it. So it was very much, both sides were very much engaged in the process, which is, I suppose, a testament to the amount of work that was put in before the scheme went to Part 8. And that Living Streets brand, we've continued to use that, and we've applied it to Blackrock and more recently to Dundrum. So it continues to build on that network principle, but also establishes this brand so people understand what they're getting when they get a Living Streets scheme, so they know what it looks like. You know, they know that the amount of engagement they're going to get with it, what the design will be like, and what to expect. And generally that sort of groundwork that we've laid results in about 70-30 support for schemes during the public consultation. So that seems to be a kind of consistent number across all of our schemes, that it's about 70% support. And some schemes would have more than 2,000 or 3,000 submissions. So it's not, it's a fairly consistent number. So that sort of reflects how many people are in favour of active travel in Dún Laoghaire. The most recent scheme we have, and you can see the date on this, is next week. So this is a slide for the councillor deck that we're going to present next week. But we have a scheme called the DLR Connector, which is quite significant. I suppose it's 8.5 kilometres connecting with South Dublin on the west and running to Dún Laoghaire on the east. So it would be of a similar scale to some of the Bus Connects corridors, and has a couple of very significant interventions in it. So on the east side, probably one of the most progressive, or maybe ambitious designs, was the roundabout that's shown on the left is a huge barrier in the urban area. And the scheme we came up with on the top right was to create a T-junction and to reallocate a lot of that space to new planted and park areas, creating, I think it's about 4,500 square meters of parkland. And at the time we were getting ready for the non-statutory public engagement, we were really concerned that people might think this was a step too far. So we put out 2 other options along with the public engagement, a crossroads option and a roundabout option. But what was quite interesting, I suppose, was during the public engagement, most people understood what we were trying to do, and there wasn't the kind of shock that we were expecting. And most people, any kind of concerns they had were more about, well, what if there's displacement into this area? Would you do a traffic calming scheme? So there was less calls for do nothing. And this is perhaps maybe signalling a cultural shift, particularly on the east side of the county, where people are actually getting, or maybe starting to understand, the benefits of having an active travel network and all the associated benefits with the public realm. So not quite claiming victory, but it's certainly there was a far more positive feedback to the project than we were expecting. Just to talk maybe a little bit about construction programs, and in the same way that the active travel teams and having multidisciplinary teams is incredibly important, it is a different set of skills when you get into the construction, and having dedicated site teams that can move from project to project does help establish a knowledge base, and you can transfer them between schemes. And it also helps build lessons learned, which is a risk management strategy as well, on particularly for cost on schemes, rather than having, say, RE teams that move from one project and then move on to other local authorities, that you keep them moving from scheme to scheme. So I think that's just maybe a comment not to forget about, that those skills when you get to construction, that's only part of the getting through the planning side of it is only part of the project. And that ongoing messaging, in the same way that it's so critical to the design and the getting through the planning, it's equally as important when you get through the construction. So the 2 photographs on the bottom right are just samples of the kind of things that we do on schemes. So it's very straightforward. Every 2 weeks we put up a section of maybe 4 or 5 photographs of what's happened in the last 2 weeks. We do a list of what's completed, a look ahead, and then any early warning issues for, traffic management that might be up and coming, or any other issue that might be happening. So what that does is, apart from being a good source of information for people, is, you can scroll through the webpage and see all the work that's happened over the last 6 months. So people can't say, well, you're not working quick enough, or there's not enough happening. So just to maybe make that point. So nearly finished now, Colin. And this is the slide I started with, showing the progress in the network, where it was in 2020. So where it is today, these green ones are schemes that are under construction or completed, and the ones in red are ones that are through planning and into detailed design. So I suppose that once they're built out, that's pretty much a functioning network established in Dún Laoghaire, with the exception of maybe some small scale interventions to connect up routes. But it maybe highlights that, with the support that's there, both internally at national level and through external consultants, that, active travel networks can be delivered quite quickly. And it's not something that would take 20 or 30 years. It maybe could be delivered a lot quicker than that. So that's all from me, Colin.
That's great. Thanks, Conor. And that wraps up the presentation part of the seminar.